My name's Steve Clifford. I've been asked to host this particular seminar, and as you know, it's around the issue of leadership in transition, or transition of leadership. It involves Ness interviewing some friends of mine, John and Debbie Wright, who lead the Vineyard network, and also a great church in Nottingham called Trent Vineyard. Now, to listen to this seminar during the course of the week, so I had at least some idea of what's been said. And I have to say, I think it's an absolutely great interview. I ended up taking copious notes on it, and I've already recommended it to one church to say, make sure that you actually get into this particular seminar. So I think it's really, really worth listening to, spending the time with John and Debbie. They're a great couple. And also, we can't have a verbal communication at the end, but do take the opportunity to chat. And then if there are comments or questions, then I'll endeavour to kind of reflect those and perhaps comment on them towards the end of our time. Having just recently transitioned an organisation, the Evangelical Alliance, as I stepped down from the role of leading it, bringing someone in as the new leader, somebody I'd worked alongside for the last 3 or 4 years. To me, this is a really important area. I was ticking boxes as I went on, and came away encouraged that we'd done a lot of it right. So I'm going about to press the button, and we'll start the seminar. If at any point it hasn't started, then do let me know.
Hello, well, it's my great pleasure and privilege to be welcoming John and Debbie Wright to this seminar on leadership transition. Now, John and Debbie lead Vineyard Churches UK and Ireland, and they also lead their local church, Trent Vineyard. And they are leaders who I really do look up to, and particularly in this whole area of leadership transition. I saw the leadership transition of Vineyard Churches UK and Ireland go from John and Ele Mumford to John and Debbie, and certainly from a kind of a observer's point of view, saw something that looked really healthy and something that I just felt we can learn from that. And then obviously as leaders of a national network, then they also would have seen local transition happen in all kinds of different local churches, different contexts, background settings, and probably seen some things done really well and perhaps some things to learn from. So I wanted to invite them to speak into us as Pioneer, and so that we can glean from the wisdom and the experience that they have got. So huge welcome to John and Debbie, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having us. It's a privilege to be involved.
Yeah, love to be involved.
Thank you.
Hello to everybody watching.
Thank you. So it'd be great if we could perhaps start off you just telling something of your own personal story of leadership transition, and then we've got a number of questions that we can work through. So tell us the story of how it worked for you.
Well, we've been leading Trent Vineyard, our local church here in Nottingham, which we planted 24 years ago. And then we took on just over 5 years ago the leadership of the national movement, as you said, from John and Ele Mumford. And so we have been the recipients as successors, to a leadership transition which involved us coming into place. And of course, at some point, we will be transitioning our local church to somebody else. So we've done a lot of thinking and a lot of reading and a lot of talking to people. Like when there's a transition happens, we know these things are challenging. So we've got on the phone to someone who's been the outgoing person, maybe the incoming person, and just said, what do you wish you knew? What do you wish you'd known up front in advance? And what mistakes did you make that you wish you hadn't?
Yeah, really good.
And a great book, before we just tell our own story, is this one.
It is.
Can
you
see
Next.
it? It's called Next, written by William van der
Blumen and Warren Bird.
Yeah.
And yeah, unfortunately, it was published just too late for us as we've been going into our transition for 2015 when we took on the role.
Yeah. So so we were comfortably leading Trent Vineyard, happily, merrily going along. Some of you may not know this, but we had originally planted with John and Eleanor the first vineyard in South West London, had a fantastic working relationship with them, came to plant Trent Vineyard, and then we joined them as part of the Vineyard leadership group for the movement.
Okay.
And then one day, out of the blue, John and Eleanor asked us if we would take over the movement. And for us, it was a total shock. And the reason it was a shock was because we didn't see them as old enough to leave the movement.
We also knew that I'm only 7 years younger than John, so it was definitely going to skip a generation and go down to somebody else. We were like, okay, we never have to consider this.
Yes.
Now,
clearly for them, they had done a lot of thinking and praying, and there was another role that needed to be fulfilled for the global movement that John and Eleanor needed to step into. We hadn't really thought about that. And so it was quite a shock. But they had obviously been praying and planning this and talked with lots of people about who the right person was and all of that. And then there was a season when we had to sort of really seek the Lord. So they said, come and tell us if you think this is the Lord. And so, we entered a time of praying, and we looked back over prophetic words, and we realized that the Lord had been speaking, but because of this issue of age and stage of life, we had dismissed them as not from the Lord. And then we looked back and realized the Lord had been speaking. So after
5 months.
After 5 months.
We just realized the Lord is saying, this is something I'm calling you to.
So we said yes.
Yeah.
And then an announcement was made one by one from John and Eleanor to the existing Vineyard leadership group. And for some, it was wonderful, great news. But there were some that it was a real shock to. And we realized that there is a part to be played in the really bringing on board stakeholders or really not just an announcement, but asking them and sort of talking about how they're going to feel about things, because that's then things began to really shake. So before we were properly handed over to, there was a kind of a year, wasn't there, of lots of shaking. And we found there was shaking in our local church with existing key leaders who struggled to understand how this was going to work, and shaking with existing leaders in the movement. And it wasn't because of character flaws or anything like that. It was just that, when someone has served another leader for a long time, it may not be right for them to stay leading a new incoming leader. And for all sorts of reasons, it was a massive challenge. And for me, I spiraled into, I honestly found myself on a few occasions in the fetal position, just asking the Lord if I could die. It was that bad. And so we had some counselling, some psychotherapy, we had a spiritual director. Yes. Yeah. And actually really held our hand through it, as well as obviously John and Eleanor were amazing. But they couldn't resolve the problems that we were facing. No. And then the handover came, and then it got worse for the first year of the handover. And this was nothing to do with our relationship with John and Eleanor. Thank goodness, that was amazing. But it was difficult. So the year leading to it and the year after it was really difficult. But but actually now we would say we've got an amazing local team and an amazing movement team. And we're, even in this critical, difficult season, we would say that we are able to lead both with joy.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being really honest with us there. That's so helpful. So if we then think about this question here, how does a leader know when it is the right time to hand the leadership of church on? It's kind of $1 million question, but I just was interested if you've got a few principles that can help to guide our thinking in that area.
I think it's never too early to start planning and thinking about it.
Yeah.
Whatever role we're in, we're the interim person for that role. So we'll be there when we're handing it on. And succession is a process, it's not an event. So whether you've yet identified a successor, it's just really good to be thinking, planning, read that book, definitely. There are other good books as well, but looking at models, looking at what's worked elsewhere, and indeed learning a lot from what has not worked elsewhere. So we've had, as I say, lots of conversations, and be an avid learner. One day it's going to come, and when it does, it's not straightforward.
And obviously listening to God, listening to those who are leading you, listening to prophetic voices, all play their part. And you might feel, as you discern whether this is the right time, that your mission is done. It's you're done. You've done what the Lord asked you to do.
You've fulfilled your ministry in full sense.
Yes, yeah, right. Maybe you've started to lose heart, or maybe you've received a brand new call.
Yes.
It's also that it could be that the church begins to show a lack of confidence in the leadership. You may find that people have started to leave, or hopefully it doesn't. This is the indicators that it's almost too late. I mean, it's never too late to happen, but maybe people start coming to you with complaints about your leadership. But what we've discovered lately is that if you can preempt that discomfort and begin to discern, what's really helped is 360-degree reviews. So in this season for us, when we've had those reviews from the movement, they've been very positive. But we're going to watch those. They happen like every 2 years. There's a 360-degree review from all many people in the movement and who we lead more directly. Just being able to speak honestly about our leadership, and we will look for some of those signs so that we can preempt that discomfort. And we're always thinking about what is best for the church, and for us, what is best for the movement. Or we ask ourselves, am I still relevant? Are we still pioneering? Are we taking risks, or are we beginning to play it safe?
That's really helpful. I remember hearing a leader describe to me he felt the grace had lifted, which I thought was an interesting and quite a helpful phrase. And I guess once the grace is lifted, then some of those things that you've just described, that would come out in the 360-degree would be seen, wouldn't it? Because there wouldn't be the same, perhaps, I don't know, diligence or commitment or passion that would come through. That's really, the 360-degree, that's really, really helpful. Fantastic. And so what qualities do you think we should be looking for in an incoming leader?
Well, let's start off with godly character. That's always going to be a good thing.
Yeah.
The criteria we find in Paul's letters to Timothy and Titus.
Yeah.
You want to have a tick box, be very aware of those. No one's going to be perfect, of course. But obviously, the larger thing that they're taking on, the more you would expect them to qualify reasonably for those things. You really want looking for somebody who's got some humility. What you really don't need is someone who's desperate for the job. Who needs visibility, or it's okay to have godly ambition and for someone to say, "There's more in me. The Lord's calling me to something bigger." There has to be a sense of not just settling and being satisfied, but if they're chomping at the bit for position, that will be a bit of a warning sign to us. So often reluctant leaders, once you've eventually persuaded them to take on the role, the most effective leaders. You want that person to be a good communicator, and relevant, whether that's on a stage talking to congregations or whether it's one-to-one and leading people. A good communicator. And emotional intelligence. The more we go on with this, the more we realize it's just a crucial thing.
Yes.
Emotionally intelligent, not just smart and good at saying stuff.
Yeah, I think also it's looking for somebody who has a good combination of kind of prophetic visionary leadership, but also pastoral gifting, because they need to be able to lead into the future, but also take the existing congregation with them. And sometimes we've seen an incoming leader they just want to impart vision and move things on quickly. And actually, an existing congregation may not always be ready to move that fast, and they need to feel prepared for.
That's really good. Yeah, really good.
Have friends in ministry, not just in the local setting, but broader, outside of the local setting. If they have a family, then the spouse has got to be on board. Not necessarily that they're doing it as a partnership, together, but they need to be thoroughly committed to that calling.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Really, if you're looking to transition to someone in the church, they've got to carry the culture of the church. They've got to have a sense of the DNA resonating with them, the cultural fit that is so important.
Yeah, that's really good.
They'll work well with teams and manage them, delegate well, be able to raise up leaders, any of those things as well.
And also appreciate and understand the business and legal side.
Yeah, they don't have to be good at that, but obviously taking a church on, you need to be conversant with what a P&L is. You need to understand maybe some legal things and all that commission stuff. You need a good team around you, especially, and they need to be sufficiently conversant to be able to lead and work with that.
Yeah, really good. The volume has just become a little bit muffled. So if you just lean in a little, that would be great.
Right.
Fab. Okay, and so how should we go about finding a successor if there's no one obvious in the current congregation? Now, I'm not expecting you to wave a magic wand because this is something that we're all scratching our heads about, but I just thought you may have some insight on that.
Well, the first thing I'd ask is a question of the question, which is there may be no one obvious in the congregation. It's not there. So be prayerfully saying, is there anybody within who might have to be a person? Because so often the successions generally work better when the person is already there. Than somebody from outside. So
and we know, there was a church recently that transitioned, and honestly, for probably 2 years, they were looking for someone outside of their church. And then at the last minute, somebody inside the church emerged who's been the person, but wasn't obvious. They weren't on the staff. A very unusual person, but came to the fore and has been the right person.
Yeah, wonderful. So generally, would you say actually somebody from within the current congregation has got a greater chance of really healthy transition than hiring from outside?
Generally,
yes.
I mean, did we hear Sam Chand recently confirm this, and he talked about it. But he says that culture trumps vision, and we're really looking for a good culture fit. So if they're outside of the local church, are they within the network?
Yes.
They carry the DNA, the values, as John said earlier. And I think if they're going to become outside, very much outside the network, outside in a different movement, denomination, I think there needs to be a lot more questions around culture.
Yes.
We had a situation with a church with an incredibly prophetic visionary leader, with a church with a very strong culture. And when the outgoing leader announced that he needed to move on, it was quite sudden, but there was a temptation to look for another great, already established prophetic visionary leader, even if they were from outside the network. But thankfully, they actually chose to go with a less experienced leader, but who carried the culture of the church, and I guess that worked really well.
Pastor who really conversant with everything and instrumental in a lot of things.
That's real wisdom. Okay, sorry, you carry on.
I was just going to say that you might need to actually approach somebody rather than, we can advertise and interview. That's a good way to do it. Advertise through all sorts of ways, but actually approaching individuals that you think might be a good way.
And have a process. It's good to have a process where, even if you're pretty certain you know who it is, to have a process where that's tested. Perhaps others are interviewed, certainly they are interviewed. Because the result of that is, if it is them, they will come into the role having the confidence that they were selected, and it's evident to people around them, yet you are the right person.
Yeah.
They really need to know that. From the Lord, they need to know themselves. Particularly, if you get to most things, you know
Yeah, that's really good, because then you have that sense that you're mandated, to do the role, because there's been confirmation, on a number of levels. That's really good. Okay, if a previous leader would like to explore staying as part of the congregation they have led, what advice would you give to them or to that whole situation?
Well, it can work, and it is beautiful when it does, but there are significant challenges to that happening. So if you're the founding pastor, or you've been there for decades, then you need to be aware of some dynamics, because you probably are more in charge than you think you are. I talked with one outgoing pastor who'd been there for many decades, and he was having some conflict with the successor. And I said, you have to realise that you're a bit like a silverback gorilla. So even if a silverback gorilla sits in the corner and tries to maintain its facial expression as completely neutral, the reality is that its presence is the group. And it can be challenging for the successor to lead with that person there. So you really do need to be aware of that. But it certainly can work, and we love the idea that it really could work.
Yes. I think you need to be very clear up front that you want to stay, and write it into the plan. And start to talk about that as soon as possible. And if you are retiring from the church, you need to think seriously, what are you going to do with your time? Because what can happen is that the outgoing pastor will start to, if they don't have their own business to mind, they'll start to mind the business of the church.
Yeah.
Ideally, the outgoing pastor will be able to be involved in perhaps creating a new role that could be helpful, but also the outgoing pastor, it might be, I mean, for us with the Mumford, one of the things that worked beautifully is they did have a challenge ahead of them. So they're still part of our movement, but they have something to keep them very busy. And, you know, they're not meddling in any way. And that's been incredibly
helpful. That's been really helpful. They've not really had, they've not expressed opinions about things except to be really encouraging to us. It's okay, we can now focus on the international coordinator role. We're thrilled that John and Debbie are now picking up the baton on this one.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Fantastic.
We could add more to that if you like.
Oh, yes, please. Yes, do.
So we're looking for a role with talking with the incoming pastor. Is there a role we might fulfill here? There may not be. That's worth looking at. And we've got friends who have either been retained a day or two on staff, or they've taken a year or two out, and then they come back and they drop it. Very much at the invitation, obviously, of the and taking a break. Did we mention it already? Like,
no, I think that's really
perhaps 3 months, even a year out, just disappear. To allow the new dynamic. So that you then come back with a different role. Because if you don't take any time out, then the dynamic is much harder to leave for the next person. Because people feel like looking to you in the room or wonder what they think about this community.
I think checking in regularly is important.
In the book there, it recommends a written agreement to establish the clear rules of engagement. So, you know, what you will do, you'll ask permission to do, what you will not do unless you're specifically asked, and the outgoing person needs to be very, very sensitive.
I think also just bearing in mind personality types, because if the outgoing leader is a strategic activator, you know, you have to be realistic that it's not necessarily bad character, but they just can't help themselves. They'll start thinking about something to do and they'll start activating something. And, you know, that's a real problem. So just looking at some of the personality issues, and what we've learned is that the posture of the outgoing pastor is really essential in this.
And don't assume that if you are the outgoing pastor, that the incoming pastor will want to learn from you, will be on the phone the whole time asking your advice about what he should or she should do. They may just not want your support. Like, then this is now a new decision to leave. They're not asking you for that. It may be the reality. There's a bereavement involved in letting go. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. They may just want to get their counsel from elsewhere. What they want from you is, well, what a great job you're doing. Heartily or motherly encouragement. But really, it's worth assuming it's going to be challenging. And for the incoming person, it's a bit like trying to manage their family, lead their family while still living in your house. It's not necessarily insecurity. It may just be pretty hard.
Yeah, we had a couple who retired from the local church, and the plan for years was that they would stay. And it was, they talked about it, they agreed it. But about a year in, they began to realise that the new pastor was struggling with their presence. And what was great is that when they sat down with them to talk about it, the outgoing pastor, the retired pastor, said to them, look, we believe it's going to be best for your leadership in the church if we move on. And then they went to help another church, which worked out, you know, well. But so often we've heard people who go through this challenge start to label the new pastor as being insecure. And actually there's much more going on. But it's very hard to do one. But it isn't, you have to do lots of things.
You've seen it work and you love it when it works. But you prepared to leave if your presence is just not working. You know, you may initiate that conversation. Maybe your successor isn't going to do that. And just be aware of reading the signs, like, is the relationship good? Is there laughter in that relationship? You know, are they honouring you, maybe in a jovial way? Not maybe. Then you can do things. Your father.
So my father, Leader St Andrews and Leader's new wife, But Mike Blavatsky, who we talked about the Watford and North the pioneer of survivor, yeah, so he went to plant his church, and so it wasn't necessarily that my father was passing the new church on him, but my father and my mother moved to their church after they retired, and there was lots and lots of jovial joking about each other. My father would tackle him. Everybody could see that it was a really good relationship, and behind the scenes there's a lot of Mike, after my parents, there's been a great relationship there, but it could have been difficult to have to move to this church.
Family members, it's worth saying, too, it's not just the outgoing pastor, it's the house,
yeah,
the adult children and stuff like that in the church. They need to conduct themselves maybe if they've been there a long time, they have power they don't realise they have power of influence.
But again, we would count for the income class, but we also treat them with honour and love them.
Yeah.
Then we may not be able to leave. Kids in schools, they're grown up, they live there, and they're doing special treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. Really helpful. And so, how does an outgoing leader set up an incoming leader to fly? Again, if you were just moving a little bit closer to the mic.
Okay. Well, recognise it's going to be hard, like we've said.
Yeah.
The more admiration, the more respect, the more leadership equity you have, the harder it's going to be to fill your shoes. So think selflessly. This is obviously not, though one's flesh might do this, obviously not about feeling good that under your watch things were successful. And what happens going forward isn't such a concern because at least you did well in your term. The truth is there is no success without succession.
Yeah.
Successor. And so doing all you can to help that leader fly in the last and the last and one of the most significant things you will do in your ministry. If there are any large debts, try and resolve that. If it's financial, like a huge mortgage, one of the things you might do is actually try and reduce that mortgage rather than leave that for somebody else. And deal with things which may use up credit. Rather, you've got the equity, spend some of yours, removing the problem person with a role to pave the way for a better future. Rather than that coming in or new women coming in having to deal with that and lose equity straight away when they've got no place to draw on.
Yeah.
At the same time, don't feel you've got to leave everything to perfect. You've got to get this organised and this tidied up, and let the incoming leader have some easy wins.
Yeah.
Some things which are evidently overdue for sorting out, so that they can start with it.
Yeah, that's really good. And I remember when we had a conversation, you were saying sometimes rather than the outgoing leader kind of talk about, the fact that there's going to be what did you say again? It was about it was like the kind of converse of what you would expect in terms of what incoming and outgoing leader would say to the congregation.
Yeah, it's to do with honour.
That's it.
And
yeah.
Continuities and discontinuities.
That's it.
It's really crucial. It's a piece of advice as a consultant when you put up with that together. Anything I remember about that whole day of consultancy. Do the opposite of what is natural. So it's the temptation is this: for the outgoing leader to want to talk about continuity, and the incoming leader to want to talk about discontinuity. So the outgoing leader wants to reinforce the past and say, look, make sure you hold on to all these things that are so important to us. And the incoming leader is tempted to talk about discontinuity and say, look, basically forget the past because we're heading into a better future with vision for the new. Do the exact opposite of what comes naturally. So the incoming leader needs to honour the past and talk about the continuity. So, we're building on a great foundation. Many things we value won't change. And then the outgoing leader talks about the discontinuity, that things will inevitably change. This person has got gifts and perspective and experience we didn't have, and we're really looking forward. Things are going to change. In many cases, they're going to improve, and it's going to be different, and it needs to be. We've seen many transitions, and we just thought, no, you've got it completely wrong. It's just missed it, and caused immense hurt. and also it's actually stalled the momentum of that.
Yeah, I remember when I heard you speak about it, I just thought that's such wisdom, and particularly because it is counterintuitive, but it does make so much sense for the sake of the congregation, and really, really good. So what should a good process include before leadership transition happens? Because obviously there needs to be a whole lead up before the actual handing over of the baton happens. So what would you say needs to be in that process?
Yeah, I would say include some objective voices, both from outside the church if you can, and inside. Like taking lots of advice from those different sources. Talk about the possibility of this, with whether you have elders or trustees. Begin to talk about those possibilities and who you're thinking about. And also, you may want to start a conversation with the person that you think is your successor, but don't promise that they're the one. Just say, how would you feel about it? What do you think? They ought to say, yeah, I think it might be helpful to be exploratory, and then start to create a plan and a process.
Even before deciding, if you feel that you've got the person you think this probably is, then begin to pressure test that by sharing perhaps the preaching that more than you already are, perhaps giving an increased responsibility, leading meetings you might have led when you're not there, involve them in the big decisions, bring them into trustee board meetings, that sort of thing. Because when you eventually come to the point of announcing a successor, you want the reaction of pretty much everybody to be that figures. We've seen them emerge, we've seen the obvious thing to do, as opposed to out of the blue suddenly, what? Who's that? It's building that sort of long on them. And I think you can do that even if it turns out that they're not in the end.
Because it will develop them.
That's true.
It's really important with this pressure testing. I think is so helpful because it then gives you the opportunity to see where some of the lacks are that you can then begin to train them in and help them grow in, or provide resources that will help them grow in those areas. So I think that's
really helpful. And how long do you think should be the time period between, say, this initial exploratory conversation with a potential incoming leader and the actual handover? Because I've heard stories where it's felt like, gosh, that's quite rushed, and then other stories where, wow, that's a really long time.
And to be honest, this is one of our best guesses, anything between 2 and 10 years, because it just depends on the kind of, if you're the sort of leader that's really good at training and raising up others, you could have someone in mind and take your time in beginning to train them and speak to them about it and all of that. But on the other hand, sometimes somebody gets a call that they're to move on, and it is very fast. So best would be anything between those two.
Well, those two extremes. Or an awful long time. It really depends on what the situation you need for you. Bear in mind that once you start having any concrete conversations, it's almost like the snowball begins to roll. And you may lose control of that because the timing will be more accelerated than you anticipated.
If the rest of the staff team knows that this is the successor, and even if the rest of the church doesn't know, or the movement, then immediately those staff are looking to that new leader to see how they relate to them, who they want to stay with. Everything begins to sort of, they're looking to them for vision, and that new person may not be ready. Certainly that was one of the challenges for us, is that we were just coming to terms with the idea that we were the right people and that God wanted us to do this, and already people were looking to us for vision, and we hadn't yet gone away to see the Lord for fresh vision.
So there is the lame duck syndrome. Once something's clear about the president being outgoing, people start giving you. Keep in mind that most pastors tend to hand over. They don't tend to hand over earlier than they should.
Okay. Yes.
They may tend to hang on a bit
too long.
Sometimes you can slow to realise that their leadership chapter has come to it. And others, perhaps because of finances, they're not completely prepared.
Interesting.
So one of the key things to do early on is just plan your future now, so that when the day comes, you're not like either financially bereft, or holding on because if I could just get another 3 years' salary, it probably would be okay for us.
Yeah, yeah. And that's actually something, isn't it? I know we've reflected just as a core team, teaching those who are just starting out in leadership, those perhaps in their 20s or church planters, even though it's hard when you're maybe at that life stage, to be thinking ahead financially, because otherwise you can end up in situations where, people can end up retiring and there's been no provision that has been made for them, or, as you say, stuck in roles, and they really should be able to move on, and there'd be other wonderful things they could do, but financially, it can end up unhelpfully. Yeah.
As soon as I went on staff at South West London Vineyard with John Mumford, I was 27, and he said you should, by the age of 27, start your pension. So make an appointment with a financial advisor. So I started then. I was on next to no money, it felt, but even the small amount, because over the many, many years it grows.
Yeah.
The earlier you start, the better off you are. But some people, like within your movement, as ours, they're already in their 50s and they've not really thought about this. Well, you need to make some hard decisions now about sacrificing in your budget, so you can actually lay out for the future. You can't just trust the Lord will look after you if you've not been diligent and put it somewhere.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Okay, so what would you say are the markers of a successful transition?
Well, I think I would actually not look to measure that too quickly, because, we'll come on to talk about the issue of romance and that's concerned. But I would say the church would feel healthy, that it's a church that has vision, that the people are growing in maturity, they're coming to faith, the church is reaching out, mobilizing volunteers and leaders. And then the church has a good, warm, welcoming feel about the place, and where the staff are content. So it's not all about whether the incoming pastor feels that he's done, that things are going well. It's that you can gauge that feel from how the church is doing. In that, isn't it?
As you say, it takes a few years to truly know. There is a pattern which is common, apparently, to getting a new job or a relationship, a romance, all sorts of things it's common to. And this is the 3 stages of romance, disillusionment, and then fulfillment.
Okay.
And so in a relationship, some people enjoy the romance, get disillusioned because their illusions are shattered, and you go looking for romance again, and so you have this cycle. The way to true fulfillment is to stay in it. You've got the initial romance, and sometimes you've got that honeymoon period as a new incoming person. You make some big changes and go, yes, this is so exciting now. The person is going to be great. And then they realize you're not actually that great. And so there's the removal of the illusions. It's a healthy stage. It can be a difficult stage. But hanging with it, you come to a place of fulfillment, and you see the fruit of what is actually being built. But sometimes you're digging holes underground and people can't see the foundations you're building. Give it time. So don't judge too early.
We watched a church local to us where there was a transition, and it all looked amazing to begin with, and then it went through an incredibly difficult time. But actually, they've come through the other side, and they're doing remarkably well. But it's a very different church.
Right. Yeah. And that's the whole thing, isn't it? Of obviously every leader can only build according to their own, vision and strengths and passion, and so the church inevitably will look different when there's a new leader.
It has to, otherwise you just be a series of Sauls inheriting and probably doing a very good job.
And so, what are some of the common pitfalls, and how can we avoid them?
Well, it's not having a plan.
Having no plan, not even that transition. It happens. It being too sudden. Change management is so important when you're leading people, and so if it's just too sudden, that's really going to keep you in the foot. Insufficient outside objective view. If you're just thinking, I feel the Lord's told me, and so I'm going to manage all this without. But wise counsel. If you're going to wait for them, many counsel is really helpful in that. And also not setting expectations out clearly enough. Transition happens.
I think some of the pitfalls are poor goodbyes, where there's no celebration of the outgoing partner. There needs to be a recognition of something wonderful has happened and it's now time to move on. But it's like there's a grieving process that needs to be recognised. And so a congregation being able to appropriately say goodbye and let go and grieve. And so again, it speaks into the culture of honour. It's something that's the real culture of dishonour, where there's no recognition that the church itself is going to have to let go. And the better you do that, the less you're paying for that later. Because if it's not processed appropriately and given permission to happen, it will come up to bite you later.
Again, it's kind of counterintuitive, like the continuity is discontinuity. The incoming pastor might feel, I don't want my people like getting tears and having celebration evening and showing films and recalling memories of the good times. I don't want that because I want to establish myself. No, go there. Just go there. Really, really honor the past and allow people to breathe and allow them to really, really helpful.
Yeah, because some of the pitfalls also is that, again, this is a little bit of continuity and discontinuities, is that the new pastor may find that he wants to paint the vision in a positive light by criticising the past. And that's seen something go wrong. And then also equally the outgoing pastor criticises the new pastor and the new vision, the way that things are happening now. And that's really
outgoing pastor, if they're complaining to others in the church or they're just raising an eyebrow.
That's so damaging, isn't it?
In fact, the incoming pastor doing this, doing that.
And I think just also where there's a relational or communication breakdown, that can happen, and not recognising it and maybe getting some outside help. These things will happen. There will be challenges, and things will need to be dealt with. But as we said earlier, it can work really well.
We've seen it work. We've seen some beautiful transitions.
They
don't come by accident. They generally happen.
It's good at resolving the conflict and with emotional intelligence and actually knowing. I think one thing I read when we were in the middle of just everything being rocky, but it talked about this leaving, like a ship leaving a port. Before it arrives at the new destination, the other side of the ocean, there's the storms in the middle and all sorts of things. And just knowing that it was going to be challenging up front, if I'd known that, I think I would have coped a lot better. So I think knowing that there can be challenges is very helpful.
And we just didn't know. We thought, wow, this is terrible. And then we read a book, another one like Managing Transition, and we thought, MVPs are like, they're not so bad after.
It's not just us. No, that's really helpful, isn't it? Because then it's almost managing expectations of if there's expectations of there are going to be some challenges, this is going to have some bumps in the road, then when that happens, it's like, oh, okay, I was expecting this, and then you don't necessarily personalize it. And I think for every change process, there's always losses and there's always gains. And I've heard other people say that up front, again, to a church congregation, that leadership transition is both positive and precarious, and there will always be losses and always be gains, and partly dependent on the level of relationship that you had either with the outgoing leader or the incoming leader, will kind of weight as to whether you feel more of the gains or more of the losses. And almost just to say that kind of upfront can help, again, manage expectations.
And I also think that we can't underestimate, there's a point in a transition where it's a little bit like crossing the bridge. And so there's the one side and then you cross the other, and that is probably the weakest link in the of that road.
Solid,
and so that is where the enemy can find in and sow all kinds of wreak havoc. And it's like, yes, this is a precarious moment.
Yes,
don't underestimate the power of prayer and fasting, and really seeking the Lord in that time, and recognizing that when there are faulty things sort of being exposed in others, and things happening, that some of this is just the enemy just having a go, really. This is the spiritual warfare in this moment.
That's really wise, and to be able to get intercessors particularly targeting kind of that, as you say, more fragile, more vulnerable moment. That's so important. That's really helpful. Is there any last things that you have popped into your mind that you want to share with us? The pearls of wisdom from John and Debbie.
Not many pearls of wisdom, but knowing it's not going to be straightforward is really good, and be very just attentive to the process and gracious. You mentioned earlier, Les, this thing about the grace is lifted. I love a little phrase I've often used about, do you have grace for it? And while you have grace for something, it just works. There are challenges. But grace needs to be all over this thing. It comes to the outgoing, this is really great.
I've got nothing to add.
No, that's it. No more. No more.
Well, that has been so helpful. Really, kind of plumbing the depths of what good and healthy transition looks like, and you've been so honest with us, so real with us, and yet, you know, have passed on some things that I know now other leaders are going to be taking them to their leadership teams, or perhaps to their trustee teams, with some very practical advice as to how to plan well, how to communicate well, and ultimately to keep that sense of God's grace, you know, in our relationships. So much is about our heart, isn't it? And if we keep our hearts right, we keep our hearts soft, then whatever the challenge is, you know, we will know the grace of God to get through them. So thank you so much, and we bless you. We're cheering you on at the Vineyard. We love all that you are about, all that you do, and it's just great. It's great to be friends working together for the kingdom cause.
Every blessing to Pioneer, and to all of you.
Yes, and to you, Ness. We greatly admire you in the role that you do as well. I just absolutely love you guys.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful. Right, I'll press stop.
I'm all managed to get that, and I apologize that I didn't have opportunity to explain to everybody about the sound issues that we were facing. But a lot of work was done to try to improve the sound during the course of that particular John this week following the recording, but that was the best that we got. So let's just take a few minutes. I'm hoping that people are able to both see me and hear me. I can't, so just put a little note on the chat line if you are able to both see me and hear me. That's encouraging. Somebody's just said yes. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Trevor, Tracy. But let's just take a few moments. Also, my keyboard froze on me, so I had a little bit of a difficulty during that. But certainly, I hope you felt that was valuable. I came away thinking what a great conversation that was. And I actually, having been involved with Pioneer for a number of years, I'm not actually sure we've had this conversation enough over the years. We've obviously transitioned from Gerald Coates to Billy, and now from Billy to Ness at a national level. But I'm not sure at a local level we've had these conversations as much as we should have done. And what I very much enjoyed, and perhaps just take the opportunity while I'm just reflecting, if there are other comments people want to make or questions people want to ask. I think for me, one of the things I loved about the conversation was the clarity, the intentionality, the provocation to be planning for this. I love that little challenge. I think it was John made it. It's never too soon to start planning. I noticed actually that Rich, thank you for doing that, put up the book title on the chat. So I've not read the book, but it certainly sounds a book that is worth getting. It's called Next Pastoral Succession That Works. William Vanderbourn and Warren Bird, and it's available on Amazon because I checked it the other day. One of the other comments that came up during the chat was every leader is an interim leader. I thought Ness's reflection on asking the question, when is the right time for a leader to be stepping down, and that has grace lifted, I think is a helpful comment on that. Another challenge which I thought really was helpful was there is no successive leadership without succession. And again, that's just the process of planning towards this in a church context. Also, I reflect back, and I think one of the areas that we haven't chatted enough about, particularly those that are employed in leadership, is around financial planning. And I loved the challenge that was brought there. It's an awful situation if one finds oneself trapped, whether as a local church trapped with a leader that needs to continue to be employed, or as a local leader trapped because of financial reasons that you need to continue to be working in that particular setting because you need to pay the mortgage or whatever. And I think just discussions around finances seem like important conversations to be had. And I also I thought it'd be helpful to comment this. I think that the Pioneer Core team and the regional teams would love to be having conversations with churches and leadership teams even now, and be available to engage in this process with churches. I think John and Debbie's on a couple of occasions referred to the importance of external input into this process, and I think that's really important. And I noticed Richard's just put, yes, we are available, and there's a smile there. So that's good to hear. The core team are saying that they want to be available for those kind of discussions. So those are just some reflections I have. I don't want to prolong this. There's a note from Nick there. Contrary to natural mindset, new leaders honouring the past and previous leaders honouring the future is good in the transition process. I think that's really, really vital. It's certainly in the context of the Evangelical Alliance and my stepping down and Gavin Calvert taking over, that was very much the spirit with which we wanted to operate, and very much wanting to ensure that we were modelling something of honouring each other through that process. So I think that's a really helpful comment there as well. The comments seem to have dried up, so I think I will declare an end to this seminar. Thank you for participating. Let me encourage you, if you thought it was helpful, to encourage the leadership team to listen to this again as well, because it actually at a local level, which I think can only be helpful. So thanks again, everyone. Be blessed and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye now.